Hello and welcome to today's knowledge share. Today I want to discuss how we can take a WPF user control and rehost it within a browser. The WPF user control in question is the one that we're looking at here on the screen, and this is the one that I've been developing for the Dynamics Windows Rich client, and it works quite well. And in previous videos I demonstrated how we could take exactly the same user control and rehost it in other .NET capable or compatible applications, for example Microsoft Excel. The ultimate intention here is to integrate the exact same user interface and business logic within an enterprise portal web part. Okay, let's switch over to Microsoft Visual Studio. The first thing that we need to do is create our WPF browser application, and I'm going to be doing it in the same solution as all the other examples for all the videos currently on my channel. The solution here contains our class library, and the class library is the assembly file that's already been deployed to the Dynamics environment. Just to kind of remind everyone, this is the assembly that contains the XAML and the code behind logic relating to our WPF user control. Right, I've got a solution folder ready to go, and I'm just going to add a new project to this solution folder, and the project type that you need is a WPF browser application. I'm just going to rename the project and give it a prefix more relevant to the solution that I'm currently working on. I'll click OK on that. Now, before we get into any design or business logic issues, there's a number of things that need to be set on the project itself, and I'm going to go into the project properties to make quite a few settings. Before we do that, one of the settings is going to involve importing a certificate. So the first thing I need to do is get rid of this particular file here. Whenever you create a WPF XAML application, Visual Studio always creates a temporary certificate, a temporary deployment certificate for that particular project type. Now, previously we should have created a GOOT certificate and a certificate that we've imported into our certificate store and deployed onto all of the target machines that we'll be using and running and executing our XAML based browser application. I'm not going to be going through that in this particular video, but if you do need more information, there's a technical article on my blog that goes through the process, and there's a number of screenshots within this technical article that walk you through step by step how to create a temporary certificate that you use to sign your XAML based browser applications and deploy that certificate in order to ensure that they run on the target machines with full trust. Okay, switching back to the Visual Studio solution, first thing that we need to do is look at the properties page for the project. Okay, we need to ensure that the target framework is set to the .NET 4 framework. We don't want the .NET 4 client profile, so let's switch that now. That has the effect of closing and reopening the project. So I need to go back into the properties page. Now we need to go down to the signing tab. Now currently the WPF browser application is being signed according to the temporary certificate that was created by Visual Studio as soon as we started this project, and that's going to be all the details relevant to this temporary certificate. We want to use the certificate that we previously created according to the technical article on my blog, and the reason for that is this is the certificate that's been imported into the certificate store and deployed to all of the client machines. So I've got that in a folder location on disk. And I'll go ahead and import that into this application. Now you need to enter the strong password that you used to originally create the certificate. And if you notice that the date changed just then as the new certificate was imported, and we now have two certificates in our application, in our WPF application, I'm going to get rid of the one that was created by default, because that's no longer the one that's going to be using, that Visual Studio is going to be using to sign our manifest. Next thing that we need to do is click the Security tab, and we need to ensure that this is going to be a full trust application. By default, Visual Studio always creates WPF XAML based browser applications with partial trust. For the kind of things that we're going to be doing screen manipulation, file system access, digital dictation, voice recognition, etc., etc. We're actually going to need access to the entire .NET framework. By clicking this, you'll inhibit yourself from deploying your application to the internet. Only intranet users will be able to fully use this application. Finally, what we need to do is change some of the settings on the Publish tab. Now, the Publish folder for the website that we're going to be using will point to your SharePoint server, and in my particular case, my SharePoint site is that particular URL portion, and that's going to be the subfolder within the SharePoint site that I wish to host my web part. Click the Options button, and you want to put in some descriptive information relating to your WPF browser application. And now I'm just going to put in the publisher name. Under the deployment section, you want to specify the name of the HTML file that's going to be used for testing and evaluation purposes. You want to make sure the option for use the deploy file extension is ticked. Underneath the manifests option, you want to tick this option that will allow URL parameters to be passed to the application, and you also want, very importantly, you want to ensure that the application uses the manifest for trust information. We don't need to do anything on the last option there, so just click OK on that. Underneath application files, you want to ensure that only these three files, the executable, the config, and the manifest, are the ones that get deployed when you eventually publish your XAML-based browser application. If I just do click Show All Files there, we can see that the symbols file won't be included as part of the publication. Okay, once we've set the project properties, we can return back to the WPF browser application, and we can begin inserting the user control and the wrapper code around the user control. Open up the holding page, and what we need within the holding page is a reference to the WPF user control. We need to add a reference to the References tab here, and that needs to point to the class library assembly. If your project is in the same solution as the class library, you'll be able to find it underneath the Projects tab. Once the reference has been added, then you need to add a directive within the page header that links directly to this assembly. And the format for this is as follows. Once you've got that, then you can simply reference the user control by typing in the name XML namespace prefix. So in this case, xe interop colon. I probably need to do a quick recompile first. Okay, and let's attempt that again. So the prefix, the assembly name, there we go. IntelliSense is beginning to catch up with me. Fine, it's now accepted it. And let's give it a name of xe UserControl. Okay. Sometimes you may need to reload the designer as it's catching up. The user control is now displaying as the designer is catching up with the XAML that you're typing in. And just to show you that this is a going to be a HTML mixed with WPF type web part, I'm going to place a little bit of a header just above the user control. So that's telling us that we've got a Sharepoint web part. Close that down and open up the code behind file. And what we need to do with the code behind file is add a using reference to the newly referenced assembly, and within the initialize or the page load, the initialize section, we need to go ahead and initialize our user control. Now I've got some code here which I'm just going to copy and paste in that will do that initialization for us. Okay, and this code looks very similar to some of the wrapper code that we've used within Windows applications, Microsoft Excel applications. We're setting the context for the user control, and in this case it's linking it to a specific table. We're deactivating debug information, we're forcing a logon to the Dynamics environment, and this code is slightly different from some of the other code that you may have seen. We're checking to see if the deployment is a network-based deployment, i.e. are we running it from SharePoint. If we're running it from SharePoint, then we attempt to get hold of the rec ID that our user control links to from the URL parameters. Okay, we should be ready to compile that. Once your project has compiled correctly, then you can go ahead and run it. Before you can run it though, you need to set it as the startup project. Okay, go ahead and hit F5 to execute your application. You should find that Windows Explorer fires up immediately. You may get challenged with this type of message. Just go ahead and ignore it. The class library that I've developed previously I've deployed to the GAC. This is just an informational message just to let me know that I can't debug it the same way as I would have ordinarily been able to if it had existed within the project itself. There may be an initial delay with XAML-based browser applications. That's pretty much down to the fact that a recompilation, a loading of assemblies, and trust levels are being established. Okay, let's switch over to Internet Explorer, which has been placed in the background while I've been talking, and we can see our WPF UserControl is now presenting within a browser. We've got the HTML header, and here's the URL, and you can see that URL prefix is XBAP, indicating it's a XAML-based browser application. So that looks good. We do have a little bit of a formatting issue in and around alignment, but apart from that, I'm fairly happy with the result there. We're at the stage now where we can go ahead and deploy our web part. Before I go ahead and deploy my web part, let's do a quick final check on our application manifest. If you go into the project properties and click on the application files, you will probably see more files in there than we originally saw at the first part of this video. We just want the executable, the config, and the manifest included as part of the deployment. The reason for that is it will keep it relatively lightweight. Bear in mind that this is going to be an application that's going to be distributed over the network and presented within a web browser. So the last thing that you want to do is deploy all the referenced DLLs, or all the DLLs that are referenced as part of this project. So go ahead and exclude all of them. Now I'll just pause this video very quickly while I go ahead and exclude all of them. Okay, they're all excluded, so just click OK on that, and we should be able to perform the deployment now. Right click on the project, take the publish option. The publish option should already have the SharePoint URL and the subfolder that the application is going to live in. We we entered that information earlier on when we were setting the project properties. Click next on that, click next, and go ahead and click finish. Now this is busy performing the deployment, and as you can see over here in the output window, we're actually getting a website being created. Now here's the URL for the website. I'm just going to go and copy and paste that into a browser window. Okay, this is the testing or evaluation holding page for the XBAP solution. As soon as I click on the Run button, the XBAP will be downloaded to the machine and it will begin execution. And you'll see that the execution times are a lot quicker than they were in Visual Studio. Okay, so we have our application up and running as a user control now with the HTML running within the SharePoint website. Just going to minimize that very quickly and show you the footprint of the application. The footprint of the application can be found in the deployment directory under the IIS www root folder. And if we have a look at one of the application files, see these are some of the previous deployments that I've done. Just go into one of the deployments there, we can see that the files that are actually downloaded from the SharePoint website are relatively small. The time delay in loading is the actual loading of the reference DLLs and their execution. Just for reference, if you open up IIS Manager, you'll notice that a new website has been created under the default website. And this is the website that hosts your XAML based browser application. If you do encounter any problems with authorizations and trust relating to your XAML based browser application, it's always a good idea just to have a quick look at your default website settings, and specifically you're looking at the .NET trust levels related to the websites. If you double click this, we can see that here that this particular website has been granted full internal usage only, full trust for internal users only. Okay. The final thing to check within our XAML based browser application is to ensure that the context is working as we would expect. Going to squash this up a little bit, make it look like a proper web part. Now the way that this web part has been designed, it's been designed to take URL parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and enter the context rec ID. We already have one in there. Now I know for a fact that there is some data related to that particular rec ID, so let's go ahead and hit enter on that. The user control reload and reinitialize using the new context that I've supplied to it. Again, we need to encounter the page load delay in and around the downloading of the XBAP and the reinitialization of it. Okay, so we have it reinitialized and we have it presenting with data. Now we can use the exact same functionality that was available with this user control as was available within the Dynamics Rich client. So we've got the taxman planning to visit London office next Tuesday. So I'm just going to post a reply message to that. Okay, go ahead and click post on that. And we can see our user control has been updated. Close this down and we'll switch over to Dynamics, run our Dynamics form just to confirm, and we can see relating to that record that that information has been posted correctly. So we have the same look and feel and the same business logic operating both in Dynamics and in a SharePoint web part.